Hey everybody, I'm Ryo Yamaguchi, the publicist at Copper Canyon Press, and you are watching season 2 of our interview series, Line Break, which goes off the page and into the homes and minds of our beloved poets. We began Line Break as a way to connect during the severe lockdowns of the pandemic, and we've had so much fun seeing poets on screen, hearing poems, talking about writing, books, and life that we simply had to keep this series going. Thank you for tuning in. So this is a momentous episode. It's our last one of the season, and no better than Gregory Orr to be joining us on the momentous occasion of his book, or really it's a book of books, whose depths have been an invigoration to me these past months. I've been privileged with vast correspondences with Greg about poetry's history, the secular and devotional, and the word, and I'm so excited to bring some of that conversation here. So let me introduce Greg Orr. Greg, thank you so much for being here with us. We've talked in the past about your morning writing practices, and I kind of want to begin by asking if you received a poem this morning.
Received a poem,
Mm-hmm.
a gift given to me from somewhere.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I work every morning. I just have done that for, I want to say 40 years, but I think it's longer. Let's say 50. And so I write every morning. I write lyric poems. A lot of it has to be given to me. Something has to happen. On the other hand, because I write every day, you hope, all poets hope to receive something new and wonderful in the mental mail each morning. But in reality, of course, what I do 90% of the time is I rewrite material that I've got. Old poems. I hope to get new poems, or an old poem that is seen in a new way, or that comes together with other old poems and forms a lyric sequence, which is the kind of thing I love to do. Thematically linked lyrics and stuff. Anything like that counts as access to joy, which is to say, writing poems or, agonizing over them, whatever.
I think it's a wonderful way to put something I've been having many conversations with people about the professional stress of the creative process of, publish or perish kinds of things, and wanting to get at something that you just so succinctly described, which is access to joy, and that the poems, provide this vehicle for that. Yeah. Do you find that? Are your writing experiences joyous every morning, even as you agonize?
As long as you're willing to fuse joy and agony together, which I think most lyric poets do, sure.
Mm-hmm.
It's the thing that makes you happiest in the world. For me, it makes me happiest too. To play with language and hoping somehow the language I'm playing will give me some access to something, some kind of human mystery or experience or whatever. So you say publish or perish. I would have to say, for me, the whole story's been write or perish. When I wrote my first poem at 17, I thought, okay, maybe I can keep living, And up until then, I would have put most of the bets on the other side of the question of live or die. And so it was first back to life, and then to the kind of incredible joy and mystery of writing poems and reading them and thinking about them. I love to think about, what is poetry? Why do we write it? What is it for? And of course, it's lyric poetry. It's for the economy of the human consciousness. It's not a product. It goes out into the world, but you're not going to get a lot of money for it.
I have to share here a joke, which maybe I've shared in the past, but I like to tell the joke that I will write a little poem on a slip of paper and then jam it into the ATM just to see what happens. Maybe we'll get a 20 out of it.
Your lucky day.
Exactly. You're
muttering, "Uh-oh, here comes Ryo again." Should we really mess with his head and give him $5 for this one?
Yes, yes, you should. That's a coffee. That works great. Um, actually, the point of commercialism, which I bring up and you bring up here too, is something that our trusted intern Apollo has a question about this that we'll get to in a bit. This is kind of an occasion. Well, so it's wonderful to think about the what you kind of said earlier too, is the write or die, and maybe I don't want to put it so violently or so bleakly, but this need to write, this need to have that. You know, I think sometimes people think of it as expression, but there's maybe a solipsism that goes to that. I kind of like what you're saying of just like, well, I just want to think about poems. I want to be in the space of poems. I want to ask this question. And I feel privileged as a poetry publisher that I feel I began every morning with that question of what is poetry? What is its purpose? You know, what, you know, both to me and to others. But when you live that daily in a quotidian way, then you amass this body of work. And so I want to share for a moment this, since it just, we both just got it in the mail. I just got this yesterday, and it's like the books. I also want to show the spine just to show how substantial the collection is. Oh, so excited. I'm really so excited. The pages feel great. When I picked it up from my mailbox, just the weight felt so familiar to me in kind of a metaphysical way. But I want to talk about its assembly. But before we do, I thought maybe let's open with a poem from it, if you feel willing and ready to maybe read something from here.
Sure. I should say it's 530 lyric poems, which is to say that those are autonomous, verbal, imaginative artifacts, but they all seem to me linked as a kind of lyric sequence through various kinds of human experience. And so I thought what I would do is read the first two poems and then the last poem in the sequence, just for what that is. None of them have any titles, one or two exceptions. Even before speech revealed your secret, there was looking. Even before song that gave you away, there was gazing. The beloved felt your eyes upon her. He dimly understood why you looked at him that way. Speech, the eyes, the stare and the glimpse, the glance that lingers. In the second poem, the sequence is a pun on I, as in what you see with, and I as the pronoun for the self. Let's get back to expression later. So, her eye and my eye, her gazing creates me. His voice in my ear, I'm seized by hearing. How because of the beloved, I come into being. Under her touch, all of me shudders. So that's the sort of advent of the beloved. Well, I'll read one really short poem too, just because.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Fun. They're all short, but this is excessively short. To be alive, not just the carcass, but the spark. That's crudely put, but if we're not supposed to dance, why all this music? And then the last poem in the book, book began with the advent of the meeting with the beloved and stuff. This is what was bequeathed us. This earth the beloved left, and leaving left to us. No other world but this one. Willows and the river and the factory with its black smokestacks. No other shore, only this bank on which the living gather. No meaning but what we find here. No purpose but what we make. That and the beloved's clear instructions turn me into song, sing me awake.
Yeah, Greg, that's so wonderful. I'm so glad to hear these selections that in this very brief span of these of the poems you selected, describe this arc that runs throughout the whole book. And but one thing that I also feel in these poems a lot is this distended occupation of Genesis, or of these generative encounters, the encounter with the beloved. And it's funny, the poems always throw me way off track of my question schedule. So I'm just going to skip to another question here that I had that was a little bit later on that I kind of want to ask, which is thinking about this idea of encounter. And with these poems and thematically tied to the beloved, the question comes up, which is who is the beloved? What is the beloved? And I want to contextualize this a little bit by the kind of fact that these poems all seem to write to the beloved, about the beloved, for the beloved, to someone else in recognition of the beloved. And I kind of want to contextualize that question a little bit about who is the beloved, and also what is your orientation, or what are the poem's orientations in this three-dimensional way around them, if that makes sense.
Sure. Well, the first thing I'd want to say is that the poems began to come to me in mid-January 2003. The way they came is they announced, a voice announced itself in my brain, and it announced itself with the phrase, "The book that is the resurrection of the body of the beloved, which is the world." And the reason I mentioned that is because this story seems to me not just about the beloved, but also about these other terms of book and resurrection and body and the world itself. And to go back to the question of beloved, when I heard that phrase in my head and wrote it down on a piece of paper, as I was being instructed to do, the only capitalized word in the phrase was book. And this was capitalized. It became very clear to me because somehow when I heard the phrase, I also knew what it meant. So all that happened in a single kind of moment there. And I knew that the book was not any kind of sacred text. The book is this gigantic anthology of all the lyric poems and songs that have ever been written by humans in whatever culture, in whatever time. It's like this gigantic cosmic jukebox or something, iPod the size of the moon, whatever. It's there as this incredibly giant secular resource for spiritual purposes being to sustain us and to explain to us the mystery, or to marvel over the mystery of what it is to be alive. And so book was capitalized. It's there. It's the big thing. Book that is the body of the beloved. Beloved was not capitalized, and I never do capitalize it. And that seems to me really important, just as it's important to say that the book is not a religious document, it's secular, it's humanistic, whatever. 30% of the people just stopped listening. Anyway, it's the beloved is not, as say in Sufi poems, sometimes the metaphor for the divine. This is the beloved is a human mortal being. The pronouns I fool around with, of course, because everything moves around. There's a lot of metamorphosis going on. but the beloved is mortal and shares our mortal fate. But she's also, or he's also, or it. My first beloved was a cat when I was a kid. Also something outside us that brings us into relationship with otherness, which is to say, into the world of meaning. And so the beloved is, I use a phrase from Sappho, Sappho's fragment 16, to try to understand it best. She says, whatever one loves most is beautiful. And that seems to me this incredible lyric claim that what we love becomes the beloved. What does Yeats say in some poem? He says, for 20 minutes more or less, sitting in a coffee shop at a crowded London store. This is Yeats. He's an old man. He says, and my body of a sudden blazed that for 20 minutes more or less, I was blessed and could bless. And it's that kind of, there's some kind of state, and we don't know what it is or what happens, but one thing we know is that it happens in relation to some other being who takes on this kind of astounding quality. It could be a person, usually it can be persons, it can be a creature, obviously. It could be a tree or a mountain or a place you loved. All these things, seems to me, are just obviously. I don't think it could be an idea. I fear the idea that it becomes abstract, because the beloved, I think, is what brings us into the world and is ultimately recognized. Even after the beloved is lost, they're brought back by poems and songs. That's what the book's for, to bring the beloved back into life, into our lives, but also brought back by the world itself, by the recognition that ultimately the beloved is the world, is this, well, you know, the willows and the river and the factory with its black smokestack. Yeah, sorry.
No, please. I mean, please keep. Yeah.
And to go on.
I hope we will. Yeah.
It's best just to ask questions like, "What's your name?" Otherwise,
I have that question too, but I decided to forego it. What I'm so encouraged by in listening to you speak about this is this idea of, well, the capacity for the beloved, and that the beloved, so this capacity, but then also, and these are things that we've talked about. I mean, I've brought up things like the dialectic, and we talked about Sufi poets, a while, and I was very eager to really disentangle or re-entangle the devotional and the secular. But one thing that I really hear in your response now is this idea of like this beginning with radical encounter. I love the way you put it, which to me echoes, again, maybe German philosophy or something of this, like being brought into relation with something, with the world, something that's outside of yourself. But one thing I really hear in this too, as you're talking, is that it's not just that you're receiving something from this encounter, but that you're in commercium. You are brought into relation, you are reciprocating. And that's what I love about the Yeats quote, that I am blessed and can bless, or I'm paraphrasing it.
Absolutely, yes. The reciprocity of relation is at the heart of it. When Buber writes the early pages of I and Thou, which I think is a beautiful document, he talks about this mutuality, reciprocity, and I think that's the story. I have to say, to go back to the issue of writing and being the lifesaver, I do emerge as a human biography out of traumatic loss, out of being responsible as a young kid, 12-year-old kid, growing up in the country, responsible for the death of a younger brother in a hunting accident. And 2 years after, when I was 12, and 2 years after that, my mother died overnight. And so the only reason I mention that is because when we talk about self here in lyric, what I experienced from that, one of the things trauma is two things, it's many things, but two things come to mind, to my crazy mind at the moment. One is that they destroy the self. Traumatic violence can, especially when you're young, just fracture the self. The other thing that it does is it isolates the self. And my experience was of extreme isolation after that, after my brother's death, and just being unable to speak to anyone or to speak about it to anyone. And two paths opened up for me. One was a social action. And when I was 18, I went south to Mississippi as part of the civil rights movement back in 1965, and just ended up jailed and kidnapped and beaten and all of which were just part of the story. That was fine, but they also discouraged me from further high risk social activity. The second thing was poems. A high school teacher showed me some poems and encouraged us to write. And to me, writing was just suddenly, there was a way to live in the world and for me to live in the world, but it wasn't me, it was poems, it was words. And so a lot of the book is about the beloved, but the beloved is also language, it's also imagination, it's also poetry itself, which is not an idea. Poetry is not an idea. It's a thing we make out of words in order to understand and communicate what we experience.
I want to hold on to this idea that poetry is not an idea. I love that, and that's helpful to me. I want to linger a little bit on
sitting down each morning and putting words on a page. I mean, where's the idea here? These are words. Those aren't ideas.
Yeah,
they have ideas, but they also have ink and other things.
Yeah. The best I've been able to muster is that poetry is an entity of some kind,
Sounds like. You did study philosophy.
Oh yeah, I did. Yeah, personally, I'm very. It's a. Can I say philosophy is a hobby of mine, if I may? But yeah,
it's a good hobby. I mean, it's trying. It's the means of the mind trying to understand what it's all about, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and I find the inner.
Don't forget that Plato said that poets and philosophers have an ancient quarrel. They never get along.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we don't get along with ourselves either.
Exactly. Yeah, the infighting. I feel part of my soul is trying to find that togetherness, that accord with each other. But I have so many things to say about the structure of philosophical books as being like modernist tech. It's like James Joyce could have written the first critique or whatever. But let me go back to, I want to kind of pause on the idea of trauma, which you bring up, and the harrowing story of your brother's death, and also of what that sort of precipitated in ways. My tremendous colleague Paula Deal really wrote some moving statements about trauma and healing from the selected here, and I kind of want to read one of these questions verbatim if I can. So just give me one moment here to find it. Yeah. So Greg, so in trauma, in this moment when you get shattered, there's this part that's surviving it also. But then you need to survive the survival, you need to heal. What does poetry look like as a space of healing? What does poetry look like as a space of recovery for you? I think you were just touching on this, and I was hoping you could elaborate. Yeah.
Sure. Well, one of the things that I think about is, you've mentioned expression before. And Wordsworth, when he wrote the preface to the lyrical ballads back in 1790, sometime back then, he defined poetry two times in that incredibly interesting document. at least it's interesting to me. The first time he says, poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful emotion. Okay, and that sounds cool, and that worked for the Romantics in some ways, and it does seem to sound like, expression. 5 pages later, he says, it's emotion, poetry is emotion recollected in tranquility. Now we're going to cut Wordsworth a lot of slack here, because he's writing at the beginning of the 19th century. And when he says emotion recollected in tranquility, I'm going to translate that into trauma recollected from a place of safety. And I'm willing to go with that's what he meant in a way, because he was also a traumatized orphan at a very early age, and so on and so forth. And if you have any sympathy, if you read him sympathetically, you'll see that. But what I think that second meaning, emotion recollected in tranquility, or trauma recollected from a place of safety, is exactly what poetry can do, which is that it's very difficult. And we all discover this when we're young poets. We think, oh, if I can just express, let it, what's in me gush out, we're golden. We've got a poem. This is it. This is what it's about. And we do that, and it's exciting. But we also learn after a while that mostly those poems don't hold up. Now, they may be raw material for a poem and so forth, but that spontaneous overflow often has about it a kind of, it's a factor of release, but I don't think it's a factor of healing. Trauma recollected from a place of safety, that is to say, from some years later, or time later, or place later. I really don't, I'm not an authority on when this will happen. I could say when it happened in my life, but everybody discovers it on their own if they do. That going back to a past event, going back with language, with imagination, with the structure that lyric poetry is, allows you to shape some of that material. First to articulate it, and then to shape it. And when you shape it, you've changed your relationship to the material. When you're a traumatized person, you're a victim of experience. That's all there is to it. There's no other way to think about it. But when you go back as a maker of poems to a painful moment, and you dramatize that moment in language, you are not a passive victim. You're an active shaper of your experience, an active maker of your own being and your own, you're affirming yourself. Now, we've talked about poetry as self-expression. Fuck that. What we really mean is affirmation of your being, of yourself. And if you're not going to affirm yourself, who is? Especially if you've been traumatized, when the stability and the integrity of the self has been deeply threatened. What poetry is, what's beautiful is that poetry can become, for some of us, ourselves in a different body, in the body of intensified language and imagination, in the focused moment of the lyric poem. And so, it's a removal from the ongoingness and confusion of the self into a moment of clarity and symbolic significance, even if we don't know what it means. There's nothing says we have to know what our poems mean or control what they do. Most of us have worked with language and imagination for all that time. We know we're just kind of moving in the dark, touching things as we go and hoping we'll find them. Well, I call this dancing on the web. It's I start I'm like some psychotic spider. Something starts. One starts and I just start bouncing around. Sorry.
I like the
It's
spidering.
all connected in my brain, but I don't expect anybody to see that.
No, it's a wonderful forest. I apologize, Greg. I'm just a little bit overwhelmed, honestly, by what I see as an encouragement here, and this idea of being an agent of your experience. That the poems enable you to be an agent of this experience, and especially an experience to which you had otherwise been victim. You know, it's a power flip, of course, right? But I don't want to. That is almost too crass of a way, I think, of thinking about it.
No, it's true. There's a kind of there's a sublime egotism in having the nerve to write a lyric poem, but it's also courage. The Spanish poet Machado says at some point, he says that in order to write a lyric poem, you have to imagine that you're at the center of the universe. Well, of course, that's morally and logically ludicrous. Of course, but it shows that what is colors called momentary suspension of disbelief, when you have to just go. And of course, you're not just going with yourself. You're going with language, or going with a phrase or that you hear, or some image, or this, or who knows what you're going with. But you do have this momentary illusion, delusion that you are at the center of the world. Frank O'Hara's got a wonderful poem, autobiographical, Literaria or something. I've forgotten how. Got it around somewhere, but anyway, here I am. You know, I was an idiot. I was a kid. Everybody hated me. The birds flew away, and here I am, at the center of this universe, making this poem.
Oh yeah, incredible. I think of that as there are a few rare audacities that we ought to embrace. You know, hope, the audacity of hope, maybe being one of them. The audacity of the centrality of one's being in the universe is something to embrace, perhaps every once in a while, especially in the pursuit of a poem. Yeah.
Okay, so you're guilty of introducing the word audacity, so I'm gonna go with that and give you one of my favorite quotes in the world.
Yes, please.
Okay, this is from Emily Dickinson. It's practically a deathbed letter, and it's as usual. It's as pithy as her poems. Her letters are just so amazing. So there's some archaic language and situations in here. Pugilist is a boxer, and Jacob is the poor son of a bitch in the Bible who had to wrestle the angel all night and was seriously wounded, and so on and so forth. Then finally demands a blessing from the angel before he's going to let the angel go. The angel says, "Hey, it's dawn. I got to get out of here. I got a day job." So here's Dickinson. Audacity of bliss, said Jacob to the angel, I will not let thee go unless I bless thee. Poet and pugilist, Jacob was correct. Talk about, you said power flip. I mean, Jacob says to the angel, you're not getting out of here till I bless you. Yeah. What's wrong with Jacob? Jacob thinks he could bless an angel that's tried to kill him. And in some translations, by the way, that encounter isn't an angel, it's God. Yeah. In any case, it's an unfair battle. And but because he's a poet as well as a pugilist, he has the audacity of bliss. And that's pretty amazing. Nobody would say Emily Dickinson was a cheerful Charlie.
No.
I mean, what we're talking is the vicissitudes of consciousness. But in certain moments, there's the audacity of bliss that creates amazing things.
Yeah.
Sustaining things.
That's so incredible. There's so much in that poem, like poet and pugilist. I
Yeah.
a T-shirt that says that.
Wouldn't it be great? Poet and pugilist. And on the back it says Audacity of Bliss!
Yes.
Exclamation point.
See, exactly. That's living. That's wearing the poem. You know.
I'm going to do this.
So you brought up something. I'm seeing an avenue here just to get to a little bit of a different realm of conversation, but you brought up earlier this idea of, in this audacity of the being in the center of the universe and creating the poem. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're looking for answers. We're wrestling with the poem. And I want to kind of pause on that, because I know we're both fans of Krista Tippett and the On Being podcast, and I'm not certain if you she just had a really nice profile in the New York Times just a few days ago. I've been actually meaning to send it to you. I assumed you saw it. And in there, she brings up, the whole profile and the whole interview is really about hope. How do we find hope in these very uncertain times? And she kind of brings up the idea of like living the question, what we'd call uncertainty or something like that, living this question. And we're talking, we've been talking in this conversation about looking back, being from a place of safety and looking at trauma from there and looking back. I'm kind of curious to look forward at this moment. Yeah, if you feel that poetry itself has a unique role in looking toward the future, and whether in apprehension and anxiety, but also maybe in hope too, Yeah.
Absolutely. So it has to. I mean, at least. You mentioned the word hope. One of the phrases that comes up in the selected books of the beloved is hope and courage. That they seem to me, for some reason, they were linked. The need to go forward calls for hope, but it also calls for courage, because we know how dark it is. And we've experienced loss. I guess what I'm partly saying in the book, partly what this sequence is about renewal. I told you the originating phrase, the resurrection of the body of the beloved. We know that within us is renewal, or we know within the world is renewal. We know that a beloved may have died or vanished or disappeared, but another beloved may be out there or is out there, has to be found. And so, again, part of the imaginative project for me, and the insistence on the secular, is to say that the lyric imagination, my lyric imagination, goes back to the natural world as vegetative world, so that one cannot help but feel hope in spring. One cannot. It's part of a sense of that renewal is built into the world, and it's not obviously as simple for us. We're mortal creatures. We live on a kind of, if the vegetative world lives on a sort of cyclic renewal world, we're in a kind of linear world. We're here, we live in time, we're going to die. But, and I don't think we're going, again, to some other world. But I do think that I do think that we have to live bravely in this world and give it everything, and also open ourselves to renewal, which is say open ourselves to poems. I mean, when you read a poem, you discover a poem that you've never heard of before, and you read it and you love it. What's happening? You're being renewed. You're feeling hope and excitement and joy in some form, even if it's a sad poem, because it means you're not alone. Oh my God, this person felt this degree of agony about their experience or their being in the world. And yet they shaped it into this beautiful song. The paradox that totally depressing, sad poems are also beautiful. are also in some sense an affirmation of the ability of the human spirit to affirm itself, which is to affirm life. And you know, we're not the only, you know, I'll shut up.
Oh no, it's so incredible. I love this. This, well, as you're mentioning the idea of a poem as an exercise of renewal, you know, that is on so many levels. I mean, one thing I think of is, I like to say also to folks that one of my favorite things to do once I've finished reading a poem is to go to the top of the poem and read it again. That one must do that, you know, all the time. I have a great quote here from Jory Graham. I have a great quote here from Jory Graham that I won't be able to read verbatim, but she's talking about line breaks and this idea of, you know, when you get to a line break in a poem, it's this precipice. You're on the edge of the cliff and you have to fall off. And where do you find yourself? But just rebirth right back at the beginning and on the next line, you know, and it's a wonderful, this kind of wonderful exercise that also distends, you know, that this descends all of that.
In lyric poetry, because it's so compressed and intensity is its hallmark, you know, every line, every end of a line is an existential crisis, and, you know, opportunity as well. I mean, what people have done with line breaks.
Yeah.
Much fun.
So I think this brings us to a good point. I find myself often in this show of getting to a point where I'm kind of curious. I'm mindful of time, so I think we had maybe opportunity for one other entity here in the interview. Okay, so I have a question for you. I have another question for you, and let me state this by saying, in this brief time that we've been talking, let's see, we've talked about Wordsworth, Emily Dickinson, we've talked about Yeats, we've talked about Sappho, we've talked about Kant and Hegel and oh boy, I'm probably missing. I mean, we alluded to Rumi, you know. And so look, we're in this ecosystem. We're in this realm of spirits, which are all these poets and these writers. And I feel encouraged a little bit when you're saying that, you know, the realm of nature is cyclical. You know, it comes and it's immemorial, or so we hope. And I feel this, of course, about swimming in the history and in the citations that occur throughout the selected. And so my question for you is a little bit of, and again, this is a little bit germane to the time that we're in now in history and in the world, but if you see these stories as being unified by possibly a metaphysics, or what maybe some folks have called a monad or archetypes, you know, do you see these stories and these voices overlapping? Do you see them, you know, saying the same poem in a collective way, or if there's anything that's particularly germane or useful to us now or to you now in this particular moment in history, in this linear moment of our history? Yeah. How's that?
Sure. Yeah, I'm not going to. One of the things I love about lyric is that it sides with multiplicity rather than monolith. I think there's a kind, as I mentioned, there's this through line that comes out of this phrase for me, but ultimately. The multiplicity of voices in the book, multiplicity of voices, the ones I quote, are ones that have nourished me, helped me live, renewed something in me. But what are they all saying? In a sense, they're saying to be alive, not just the carcass, but the spark. You know, that that we're, you know. We're supposed to dance because there is a music. There's a music all around us. The world of being is a kind of music. And it's telling us, you know, wake up, be alive. Even if being alive is suffering, but turning that suffering into song. So you know, what is it? All my heroes were cowboys. All my heroes are poets, you know? That is to say, they're human beings in different cultures and times that have affirmed the mysteries and passions of being in the world, and they've given them shape and form. They're on the side of affirmative being and renewal. So that, I guess that's a through line. It's not, again, it's closer to sort of paganism than to philosophy. But it's Whitman. It's Whitman, for crying out loud. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. I mean, that's a very grim vision of existence. I've just become the grass. On the other hand, in section 6 of Song of Myself, he tells us, what is the grass? A child asked, fetching it to me with full hands. And he says at the end of that poem, he says that the smallest sprout, and if there is, that everything goes onward. There is no death, but if there is, it's different than anyone supposed and luckier, which is a wacko Whitman thing to say. But he's taken in that mystery of mortality, and loss, which is finally one of the huge mysteries. And he's transformed it, but without going to heaven, without going to nirvana or any other world. And I think that's one of the things lyric poetry does. Look for me under your boot soles, but also look for me in my book. Look for me in the leaves of grass. And, that's, and I do.
Yeah. I'll take that with me for the rest of my days.
When Walt Whitman talks to us, how did that loony figure out a way to speak to us with such incredible intimacy? I may not tell everyone, but I will tell you, he says in one of his lines. And he gives us this sense that spend the night with me and I'll show you the secrets of the universe. I mean, it's that erotic seduction, which is also should not be left out of the story, the role of the erotic and as connection. But he creates intimacy. There's no intimacy. I mean, everybody makes fun of people. Sometimes make fun, usually academics, but he knew, he's intuitive, the urgent intimacy latent in the relationship between the poet and the reader, and it's beautiful. I don't know what I just said, but it's true.
No, it's very true. And I mean, I'm so taken by this with Whitman that he's a poet who can, well, multitudes, I mean, can speak on behalf of a nation as its fledgling, and also speak just one to one, and I think that brings us back to this idea of the beloved as an interlocutor, as a beloved as the object of one's poem, and
yes.
Yeah.
But of course, Whitman is proof that it's possible to have, if you're a democratic mystic like him, you have an infinite number of lovers. He falls in love with everybody in the crowd as he walks down the street. I mean, according to his testimony, I have no idea what he was like personally, but the testimony of the book, is that everyone is as amazing as he is, and he wants to be the perfect lover, which is to say the perfect poet for him. I mean, I'm sort of approximating from the preface to the Leaves of Grass. He just connection. E.M. Forster says, only connect, right? And then they asked him, where'd you get that quote? And he said, well, I think it came from Whitman. And it is Whitman, connect. Connection is meaning. We connect to words as poets, meaning, we read a poem and it connects to us, meaning. We connect to another person, they connect to us, meaning just, blossoming out as hope. intensity of being.
Yeah. Oh, I'm taking all of this with me, and I think this is well, I think you've brought us back to our initial engagement, which is this idea of being brought into relation, and that connection and poems facilitating that. And again, in the context of this call to life, you know, there's here we are. What are we going to do? You know, and yeah. I'm just been very encouraged by all of this today, Greg, and I don't think I've ever felt more solace in the space of poems than at this very moment from this conversation. And so I want to thank you very, very much for that. And I think let's leave it here for our audience. I'm so glad to have you today and to be talking about all of these things and talking about all these writers. I'm just going to give the book one more little look here. I'm so excited to have this in my hands, and I hope you are too. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's always a joy to talk about poetry with someone who's excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. We could talk for hours more, I know. And so, and let's do so in the future, in person next time, hopefully. You know, yeah.
Sounds good.
That sounds good. Well, thank you, Greg, and thank you all out there for joining us for this episode. And we'll see you in the next season, season 3, coming soon.